Good afternoon, everyone. I know that folks are still logging on to join us this afternoon, and we are encouraging everyone to please share your name and where you're joining us from today in the chat box. Take a moment to introduce yourself. You can share a message with all panelists and attendees by selecting from the drop-down menu in the Zoom webinar chat box. We're really excited to have you all join us this afternoon for today's conversation. This is the third conversation in our series on reimagining youth work in a COVID-19 era. We are learning so much about how folks are adapting to our changing circumstances during this pandemic, and also learning what opportunities may exist and how we can take ways that we've had to pivot and adapt to improve youth outcomes and improve youth well-being in the different communities in which we work. I just want to take a moment to do some introductions before we get into the conversation, allow more folks to join us, and again, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. At YouthREX, for our in-person and online events, we traditionally begin with a land acknowledgement. We believe that it is critical to interrogate colonization and really reflect on and acknowledge the traditional territories of the places where we live and work. But we realize that folks are joining us today from so many different places and spaces. And so this land acknowledgement recognizes where our provincial office at YouthREX is located, which is at York University. Both YouthREX and York University acknowledge their presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. We encourage all of you to reflect on the lands where you may find yourselves, where you live and work. Again, we know that folks are joining us today from places all across Ontario, and we want to make sure that folks take the time to reflect and acknowledge that. And if you would like to share an acknowledgement of the land where you find yourself today, please feel free to do so in the chat box. Now, my name is Katie Rogers, and I am the Knowledge Exchange Manager at Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange, or YouthREX. YouthREX is a provincial initiative. Again, we are based at York University in the School of Social Work, and we are committed to making evidence and evaluation practices accessible and relevant to Ontario's grassroots youth sector. And we do this in a variety of different ways. One way is through knowledge exchange work. We define knowledge and evidence as coming from research, practice, and lived experience. We privilege all forms and all ways of knowing, and we try to connect folks to share that knowledge through our Knowledge Hub, which features over 1,300 resources connecting shared knowledge to youth work practice. And through events. We used to do in-person events. Now we've shifted, obviously, to offering online events. You may be familiar with some of our webinars, and this conversation series is an effort that we've made to try to connect folks during this difficult time. We also have capacity building opportunities, so professional development opportunities. We offer online certificates, workshops, and a variety of resources that can help you in your work with young people in the communities where you find yourselves. We also support program design, development, and evaluation. So we consult with youth programs on how they can understand their impacts and tell the story of those impacts to improve youth well-being. As I said, this conversation series is our effort to connect people from across Ontario to talk about the ways in which our work has had to change and shift, to look at practices and opportunities for how we can improve the way that we are connecting with youth. And we are really, really excited that you all joined us today. we are recording this conversation, so you will be able to access it on our Knowledge Hub. In the next day or so, we will make sure to add this as a resource and any related resources as well. And we're not able to currently offer closed captioning or subtitles, but we can provide those folks who it may benefit a transcript of the conversation. And if you have any questions for myself or any of the other folks in today's conversation, you can raise them through the Q&A box or in the chat box, whatever works easy for you. We will, leave time for questions. We will take questions up throughout the conversation. So if you have a thought, a question that you want to share, we encourage you to do so at any time. And I think that is it in terms of the details that you all need to know to be able to engage and participate fully. And so I'm going to bring my colleague Cyril on to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Cyril Cromwell, Learning Development Manager here at YouthREX.
And now we will invite our guest for today's conversation, Gabrielle, to join us. And we'll give Gabrielle an opportunity to introduce herself before we get into the conversation today.
Sure. So, ani bojo tanchekiwao mi shindengwe ankwat kwendishnakas pakchansin don tuba umamawene ne shnabe king indonji makwando dam nisamedana ashenish nadiso bebonwe. Yeah, so hey everyone, my name is Gabrielle Fayant. Most people know me as Gabby. I'm originally from Alberta. My family comes from one of the 8 land-based Métis settlements called Fishing Lake, also known as Pakchahanse or Sputnow. And I'm a guest here on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory, which some people might know as Ottawa. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm the co-founder, co-CEO of Assembly of 7 Generations.
That's awesome. Thank you for joining us today. We have a lot of interest, and obviously from all over the continent, we have people that are joining this conversation. I suppose we can start by just getting a better sense of what the Assembly of 7 Generations is all about. So maybe you can introduce us to that and let us know how youth voices and youth leadership fits into your model.
Yeah, so A7G is our Assembly of 7 Generation, also known as A7G. We're a youth-led, youth-driven, Indigenous nonprofit organization. So we have 3 co-CEOs, and all of us are Indigenous. So myself, I'm Métis. One of the other co-CEOs is Anishinaabe, and the other co-CEO is also Anishinaabe and Algonquin. And then we also have a board of directors that is, at the moment, all Indigenous and just in their 30s or under 30. So young people, young professionals, and then we have a lot of different programming, and from those different programs, that's kind of like where a lot of the youth voice comes through into the organization. And so we really take a lot of guidance from what they tell us. We really try to dismantle that nonprofit idea of like a top-down approach. So even though we're the co-CEOs, it doesn't mean that we're actually making the decisions by ourselves. So a lot of the decision making and strategic planning comes from the youth themselves. So I'm gonna share a little, I guess you could call like a little graphic. So could you see my screen? Nice. So this is like a long time coming. This took us quite a few years to actually create, just because A7G, we do a lot. And so sometimes it's really hard to fit what we do into Western ideas of what an organization looks like. So it took us a while, but we created this in partnership with the Students' Commission of Canada. And so they helped kind of develop our ideas and vision. And so really, like, A7G is this tree. And there's many other groups like us across the country. And so we're not like the end all be all of youth organizations. There's tons of other organizations, some that are incorporated, some are not incorporated, some are collectives or groups. And so this was just our story. We really wanted to, capture that idea of like how we're grounded. And so we really feel like we're grounded to those other trees, those other youth groups, and those are our kin. Our kinship is also our family ties, our ancestral ties. So it could be families and communities that we have relations with. We also want to be connected to the land, and without the land, we wouldn't have our languages, we wouldn't have our culture. So the land is very, very important to us. You often hear a lot of Indigenous youth talking about land back. So that's a really big movement for Indigenous folks right now. And then, of course, our ancestors and culture. That's what we want to be grounded in, and that's what we are grounded in. And so from that kind of like grounding, that's where we really developed this little tree trunk that you see here. And so A7G is kind of in the middle, and then around that we have our close family, and then around that the larger Indigenous community, and then around that the larger non-Indigenous community. And so all of those people and communities play a big role in like the foundation of A7G. And so these are also like some ways that we describe it, the work that we do, and that foundation. So community, gratefulness, traditional practices, land-based learning, youth planning, enjoyment, inspiring, passion, personal growth, and safety. And these are like a lot of words that Indigenous youth themselves have articulated to describe what we do. So again, like these aren't just our words as co-CEOs or leaders of like the organization, but these are stories and words that come from young people themselves. And so, like having a really good foundation is really, really key to building a house, but having like a really strong tree trunk is really important for the success of a tree. And so, the bigger that tree trunk grows, the bigger that tree grows, the more branches grow out of that tree, the more leaves grow. And so I think it all started with our annual events. And so before I go on, I should mention that we don't actually have any core funding. So none of us have like full-time salaries to do this work. None of us, like we don't like punch in our hours and then check out at 5 p.m. This is our life. This is what we do every single day. And that might seem like a lot for some people, and it might seem overwhelming, and it is exhausting, but we have to do this work because, we really love our peers, we really love our community. And so we really started from our annual events. I think it was like our elders and youth gathering that really started things off for us, and we started that a couple years ago. This year would be this year I think would be our 4th annual Elders and Youth Gathering. So I'm not sure how that's going to look due to COVID, but we'll figure it out. We have some ideas. So that's kind of like our annual events. Our round dance is really important. Every summer we usually do a land camp, and so we haven't been able to do that this year, but we've been going out in small groups and doing like berry picking and doing other other things to work around COVID restrictions. And then the other thing we do in the springtime is we also go out and like tap maple trees and collect maple water. And so we kind of have like seasonal annual events.
Wow.
Yeah, and then we also have special events. So those are kind of like events that kind of sporadically happen. And something that's really important to us is being able to share opportunities. So sometimes an opportunity will come up and we take it. So, you know, like one time we did like a fry bread showdown because some of the cookums in the community wanted to see like who had the best fry bread. And so that was really fun. We ended up, so our reigning champion right now is Roberta Anderson. And we got her like one of those like UFC like fake like toy belts.
Nice.
And so it's like ultimate fry bread champion. And then from there, other things that we've been doing over the years is advocacy and reports, because like we see the struggles on the ground, and so we also know from experience, from observation, is that, you know, people, non-Indigenous folks often need reports in order to change policies or systemic concerns. And so we started writing reports, and I'll get into those later on. But we also do like a language drop-in, and so that's been really great. We moved it online, and so we've actually seen a lot more attendance online for language drop-ins. And so that's been really nice to see. Folks from like all across Ontario have been joining. Different Anishinaabe, Moan dialects have been joining too. And then we also do, every week we have a Friday night drop-in. And so that was like a little bit challenging online. But what we would do is we just like let people know like we're here like every Friday. So for the last 2.5 years, we've never missed a Friday.
Wow.
Like it could be Christmas time and we'd be there. One time, like there was even a tornado and we were there, and it was really nice to be there with each other through like, it's not like we knew the tornado was happening and we went to go meet up with each other, but the tornado happened while we were with each other. And it was really nice to like, because I come from Alberta, so tornadoes are like really scary for me. And so it's like nice to have kind of support and checking in on each other. And so when we went online, it was good. Like we definitely saw a drop in attendance, but folks that needed it still came out, and we played like a lot of games and just like laughed with each other. And one time we even did like a poetry night. And then something that also came out of COVID was actually the Tea and Chat Mondays. And so every Monday we have like a different knowledge keeper, and we just like hang out with them, we have tea with them. And that idea actually came from our knowledge keepers, who said that during the pandemic, they still wanted that intimate moment to transfer knowledge. And that transfer of knowledge, like I feel like people think it's like an Olympic torch, like passing on to the next generation, but it's not like fancy or romanticized like that. Literally, the way that we gain knowledge is by hanging out with our elders. So it could be like having a meal with them, having tea with them, doing maybe like helping them clean out a shed. Maybe it's maybe it's doing their laundry, like cleaning some blankets for them. You know, just like those simple things. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we're at. We have. And again, like this is just like a snapshot. So there's a whole bunch of other things we do. So yeah, that's A7G. It takes a while to explain, but hopefully I did it justice.
Gabby, what platforms are you using? It's more of a practical question, but to facilitate these online drop-in spaces, and how are you reaching out to young people to let them know how to engage in that programming?
Yeah, so we just use Zoom. Zoom has been pretty good for us. We had to we had to put some safety measures in place due to trolls. And so usually when we host a meeting now, there's like a few like people that are the hosts, and so we also don't share the link publicly. So you have to like DM or email us, and so that I think also goes into like community building. So like if you just randomly DM the account but no one knows who you are, it you might look like a troll. And so what I suggest is like if you're just coming into new spaces, and it just like slowly make that introduction, like before just asking for a link, just be like, hey, like this is who I am, like this is why I want to attend. And so making a connection instead of just like a transactional relationship. And so those are like ways that we've got around it. We've always had a strong community connection. So building community is something we've been doing for the past like 5 years, really. So we've always had that connection. And so transferring online, it was just, it's just more like maintaining those same connections and then building on top of it. And it was really good. We actually had some folks that maybe like couldn't make it to like in-person things. Maybe their schedule wasn't working out, or maybe they also felt like by going online, it was like, like people get really like socially awkward or anxious or in social settings.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of them have told me that they felt more comfortable online because then they could just like leave. Whereas like if someone leaves in person, it's a lot more obvious.
Yeah.
So
Or blame it on a technical glitch, right? Something, oh yeah, it's my computer.
exactly. Yeah, so it's been pretty like, I don't know, it's been pretty good for us. We also did like kind of like one of those special events that happened is during COVID, we started doing care packages.
Nice.
And so we delivered care packages about like once a month to Indigenous youth in the community. And so that was really nice to see. We did like a call for donations from the community, and we were able to fundraise like $2,000 in a week.
Nice.
And so, yeah, that's been really nice to see like how communities come together and how we support each other.
That's such rich information. So thanks for sharing that. I'm going to remind everybody that's participating, if you have questions or comments, please share them because this is a conversation. We've got over 30 minutes left, which is great. So as we were listening, you were talking about some strategies in terms of how are you going to adapt with this pandemic. So it's great to hear a little bit of those strategies. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about maybe some opportunities and challenges that you've experienced dealing with the pandemic. But then maybe we can have a conversation about some research and how you're also tying in research practice and ethics. I think there's also some space for a conversation with that after this one, but let's rewind a bit. So looking at opportunities, looking at challenges, what kind of things have you been responding to with the pandemic lately in your program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's been really interesting because we've always had those really strong connections. It hasn't been that challenging to meet youth where they're at. And so, yeah, like we haven't actually had a lot of challenges, like with outreach and retention and those kind of things. So I think for us, just like what we kept doing is like checking in with people, like just like, not waiting for youth to tell you that there's like a crisis in their life, but like just constantly being like, hey, like how's it going? Like what did you do today? And just creating spaces like that where also like youth don't want to fall into these like weird ideas of being like at risk. Like no one wants to be labeled at risk. And so we really try to avoid making anyone feel that way. And we really focus on just meeting folks where they're at, not judging them. And yeah, that kind of goes into like how to create a safe space.
Yeah.
And before the pandemic happened, we actually did a little bit of research, and we asked organizations in Ottawa that serve youth for breakdowns about how they serve Indigenous youth, what programs they're offering, etc. And then with that information, we sat down with about, I think there was about 15 Indigenous youth that came out. And like, I think for like non-Indigenous researchers, that doesn't sound like a lot, but for Indigenous folks, that's like actually a pretty successful turnout when you're doing research with Indigenous folks. And so
Can I
we,
just pause there for a second?
yeah.
I'm not sure of all the people that are on the webinar, but there might be some that are not familiar with the context and the history. Could you explain a little bit about why that might be a challenge for the community?
Yeah, sorry. I know I totally forget that sometimes like people don't live in my little bubble. But yeah, Indigenous folks have been like researched by non-Indigenous people and governments and systems for, you know, ever since Europeans arrived on this continent. And so we see research like really racist research done by anthropologists in the early 1800s into the 1900s. And that's connected also to where racism and like these class divisions started. And so right away, like our relationship with researchers and non-Indigenous peoples coming into our communities and then writing about us has been very, very problematic. I think that non-Indigenous folks also see research very differently than we do. So for us, like research is like a sharing circle. So research is like literally just checking in with people and also like not just taking their information, but giving them what they need in return, or at least fighting for what they need. And so that's how you develop trust. You know, like you can't just come into a community and ask them all these questions and give them a gift card, and then they don't even know what you do with that information. That's so problematic. And so you have to build relationships, and it can't be transactional. There has to be consent, and youth want to know like, okay, like if I tell you all of these things, is it even gonna matter? Because in the past it hasn't. You know, we could turn black and blue telling everyone what's going on in our communities and all the problems, but we haven't seen change. So, you know, we're really cautious about research and about when outsiders come into our communities. And so a lot of the time you'll see kind of like someone will go into a community and they'll be like, oh, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to give $50 gift cards out. And then like 3 youth show up. And those youth are like, cool, I got a gift card. Okay, see you later. So we're trying to really get away from those kind of models. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
when you're
could share. Did you want me to share like we even like actually wrote a guideline for ethical research with Indigenous youth.
yeah, please.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thanks.
When you're sharing all the amazing things that you're doing, you're talking about there's no core funding. It's like, you know, it's not just asking questions. You have actions, and the actions are not even being supported properly.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
amazing. But yeah, please share. So this is about ethical approaches.
Yeah, so this is sorry about that. Yeah, so this is I research like some research, and basically it's called Indigenous Youth Voices: A Way Forward in Conducting Research with and by Indigenous Youth. So we did this in partnership with the First Nation Family and Caring Society, and we actually got a SHIRT grant to do this, which we were all kind of shocked to get. But this was, so we talked to Indigenous youth. We also talked to them as groups, and we didn't actually say like, oh, if you're over 30 years old, you have to leave, because what youth really told us is that they want to see more holistic approaches anyways. It can't be just like one segment of the population making decisions for the whole community. So after all of these like really great conversations, I think we did about 6 across the country with different Indigenous groups too, because you know that term Indigenous, it's like it really blankets so many different experiences. So just within Indigenous, there's First Nations, which is like 60 different nations, sorry, if not more, like I would say over 300 different experiences and communities and nations and different language groups. And then there's Métis, and then there's Métis, like where I come from is Métis settlements. So that's like really more like we call ourselves Bush Métis, because most of those people live out on the land. And then there's a lot of Métis that grew up in urban environments, so their experiences are very, very different. And then there's also Inuit, yeah, so there's like geographical differences, as well as just like your experience living in Ottawa versus Toronto as an Indigenous person is different. So anyways, we spoke to all these different groups and got as much qualitative data as we could. And what we heard like loud and clear from all of these groups is that research has to be accessible. So you have to think ahead. And so for example, like if you're doing research in a building that doesn't have wheelchair access, that's inaccessible. If your research is only done using academic language, that's not accessible. So things like that. Indigenous youth told us that they wanted to develop and help lead research. So again, it can't just be like an outsider deciding what they want to research. Indigenous youth told us that they want to decide what they want to research in their communities. Again, holistic approaches. For us, like, you know, that whole family values and family approach, as well as including elders. You know, it can't be like segregated or siloed approaches. That doesn't work for us, and it hasn't worked. Research ethics defined by Indigenous youth. And so I know that there's tons of like research like councils and, you know, like ethics boards and all of these things, which is really great. But sometimes those ethics don't actually meet the ethics that Indigenous youth need. Right. And so Indigenous youth told us that they have to be in charge of those ethics and policies. Again, community-led, culturally specific, because like I said, like Indigenous is just this huge like blanket term. Reciprocity. So reciprocity to us is not about I spend an hour with you and you pay me. That's not what reciprocity is. So reciprocity is like a continual relationship of like giving and receiving. And so Indigenous youth want to know, like, what are you getting out of coming into my community and getting this information? And be honest about it. Like, I'm coming into your community because I want to finish my PhD. Like, cool. Like, that's fine, you know, but what is a community going to get out of it? You know, conversations like that, like real honest conversations. And then lastly, something that's really, really big for many youth groups is, you know, the implementation of TRC Call to Action 66. And 66 talks about multi-year funding for youth programming and grassroots programming. And so, you know, if that call to action was implemented, that would be so helpful for us, for example, at A7G, where we don't have any core funding or anything. So yeah, that's kind of what they told us. We also made sure, like, as you can see in these little pictures, that it wasn't just like answer this question in like these words, but we asked for input through pictures, through drawings, through music, and many different avenues. So
amazing.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I know you've spoken so much about the importance of relationship building and building trust and building community. And I imagine that was really central to the work that you were doing and are continuing to do, but specific around the work that you did that mapped services in Ottawa specifically, but then also answering questions around safe spaces. What makes a space safe? We had a question from someone joining us today about how educators can best support Indigenous youth and meet them where they're at. And I'm wondering if the around safe spaces might help folks to understand how they do that work meaningfully and intentionally.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said, a lot of like non-Indigenous structures or systems, they really need reports always. And so, we don't always work like that, but we want our communities to see better. So we end up having to adapt to these systems and these structures. And so one thing that has been a really big concern in the Ottawa community for quite some years is that the lack of Indigenous youth services. So like I don't consider myself a young person anymore. Some people do, and that's fine, but I kind of more consider myself in an auntie role. But when I was a younger person, like in my 20s, I really struggled. And, it felt like I went through it by myself because I didn't have those services that I needed. And so as I got older, I'd see the same thing happening again and again. And often A7G, like we have to intervene. And again, like we don't have any money. We no one's getting paid to do this work. No one gets a salary or benefits to do this work. But yet, like we're having to intervene in suicide crisis, in homeless crisis. We're having to intervene when a young person might be pregnant. Like we're having to intervene in all these roles. And so it's really unfair. And so we wanted to really document this information. And so that's where we started doing the mapping Indigenous youth services. 1 second, I'm gonna just, yeah, that's the one. So we actually got funding to do this from Employment Skills Development Canada, like a small grant, I guess you could say. And I'm not sure if they really thought that this is what we were gonna do, but so we did. Because again, like it's community defined. Government programs, they create things that they want communities to do or see communities doing, but we've had to like find ways around that. We've had to find ways around language so that we can make sure that we're doing what our community needs us to do.
Right.
And so, yeah, like all of these things are on our website, just a7g.ca, and so they're all public. But so these are like services that youth told us they needed: is housing, tutoring, scholarships, like really your basic necessities. But in addition, a lot of Indigenous youth felt that they wanted more ceremonies, cultural services, language programs. And then these, like, it goes into some of the concerns, but they also identified like what makes a space safe. And so this could tie into like educational situations as well. And so really, like, what I would really recommend to teachers is that instead of focusing on like what you can do for Indigenous youth, like really really think about, is the space safe first, and then go from there. So what the youth told us is they wanted spaces that are led by community, and like just, and it goes into detail. They want peer-to-peer support. So maybe as an educator or a teacher, maybe it's not actually your role to like be that support person for that young person. And maybe it's more about like helping them find other peers that they can talk about things with. Because I know, like, even myself, like in an auntie role, sometimes the youth don't come directly to me.
Right.
Sometimes it's like a conversation that happens amongst themselves, and then they'll reach out to me. And so there's always, like, we know how it was when we were young. We would talk to our friends first, even before we talk to our parents sometimes. They also wanted spaces that are culturally safe. So how is a young person treated when they say they want to smudge?
Right.
Is it like this big deal? Like, is it like, oh, I have to let the janitor know to like turn on the ventilator from this time to this time? Or it's like, oh, like everyone has to go outside, or like, you know, those kind of things. Like those feelings make you feel like, oh, never mind. I don't need a smudge then if it's that much of an effort. And that hurts. Like that has a longer term effect than just that moment. I really like would recommend that in all areas, like everyone that works with young people, like should really be trauma informed. Like it should be a bare minimum, especially working with Indigenous youth. Like many of us carry like really deep traumas. Some of us even carry the traumas of residential schools, even though we've never been to them. So like really being trauma informed is so, so important. Meet youth where they're at. So like, you know, not judging them for where they're at, but literally just being like, cool, this is where you're at, and that's fine. I'm gonna support you no matter what. Those are really important words to hear, is I'm gonna support you no matter what. Even if you decide that you don't want to take this opportunity that I'm giving you, I'm still gonna support you. Those are very, very important. And space for self-autonomy. So young people, like, they know what they want and they know what they need. And so just listening to what they're saying instead of like prescribing what you think the solution might be. So yeah, those are like, and they seem so simple, right? But for whatever reason, I don't know what happens. It just like gets like thrown out the window. So yeah.
There's a whole, like, I guess, vibe of being taken for granted. Like, for example, your organization is doing so much work. You've done all this research, and it's most useful because it's most authentic. Yet, again, like the support and the appreciation doesn't seem to be there. And we were having a conversation earlier, just a brief conversation. We were talking about like this practice of like appropriation, where people will take the knowledge and take the resources, but not necessarily credit back or give back to the work. Are you still seeing that as a big issue?
Yeah, that's like a really big concern, is we're like, we want to share as much information as possible, but at the same time, we've seen instances where we've shared and then we've seen our work like duplicated somewhere else without any credit, without any thank you, and definitely without any compensation involved. And that's really hurtful. Like we do a lot of hard work. We do, like, many people have considered it life-saving work, and like that's like very, very nice to hear for me, but it's also, you just keep doing it. And like, so just an example is, there's some like larger organizations, larger nonprofit organizations, and I think that this might be a cultural problem within nonprofits, kind of like this hoarding of funds and like just building like
Oh,
empires. And it's like, I don't want to see any empire building. I want community
yeah.
building. But So what'll happen is like they'll see like that young people come to A7G, and so what they need to get numbers for their funding. And so what they'll do is they'll literally like copy and paste our programs into their organization. And these are like large organizations, like these are multi-million dollar organizations that are that are taking our grassroots ideas and initiatives. You know, it's so hurtful. And these are organizations that have like paid salaries. Like sometimes they even have five people working on a youth file. And we don't even have one person in our organization on salary. Some of these organizations have like large buildings to do like so many cool events and things, you know, and meanwhile, like we have rooms that are donated to us like once a week. And so like that's all like real like hurtful and stuff. But on the flip side, something that I always try to like remember is like how much community really loves us and like supports us. And so like for example, this one like organization that we've always been working with, they're super tiny too. Like they have like one full-time staff, and they're just like, okay, anything I can do to help you guys out, I will. And so they'll give us like a key to their offices.
Nice.
And then later on, like this other organization was like, I want to support you guys. And this is a non-Indigenous organization, and they even told us that they wanted to give us back the land. And we're like, wow, like that's significant. And they haven't given us back the land yet, but they gave us a key to like this like really cute cabin that they have in the bush. So I have like a bunch of keys to like a bunch of random places in Ottawa.
Key by key, door by door. Wow. I want to thank you so much. We still have some time, which is amazing. I want to encourage people to ask more questions because we're in conversation. Do you have any questions for us? Thrown on the spot.
I don't know. I feel like I've just been in like presentation mode.
Well, there's something that's kind of coming to mind for me when we're talking about like the nonprofit world. It's something I'm really interested in kind of unpacking. It's the culture, like building empires, and sometimes it's not so much about doing the job as like our mission and our vision and mandate state, but it's more about keeping the organization alive, which means you have to apply for funding and play a certain game and call young people at risk and play by certain rules. And you're kind of that mission drift away from what you were initially incorporated to do. That corporation status in terms of the structure of how society is so dehumanizing in this culture, in terms of the dominant culture now, impacts all our work. And I find like we have, you know, the grassroots frontline warriors that's doing it from the heart, that's doing it because they have more at stake, that's doing it because they're connected, that doesn't have all of the social capital and economic capital benefits from that work. Their heart, you know, their heart's on the line, they're doing the work, and that balance is so difficult to maintain. So those are some of the things I think about. And when we're talking about Indigenous specific contexts, we have a lot of people on this webinar from a lot of different sectors. What kind of information would be helpful to share with them in whatever sector they are to have more consideration for the impact that their work is having on Indigenous young people and communities? Pat, for example, Pat's a great friend of YouthREX, been doing some really supportive work. Pat is asking like maybe top 3 things that we can do to do better now, and that we, I'm assuming is, you know, it could be perhaps non-Indigenous allies specifically, thinking about organizations, thinking about what are some things that need to shift even in our jobs and our workplaces, and that's connected to the broader system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I think just having like real honest conversations with ourselves and with our colleagues if we're able to. I know like a lot of folks in nonprofit work, like they just, you know, they just need to pay the bills, right? But having like the strength and like the bravery to ask questions, like ask, you know, like ask yourself, is this role, am I benefiting off of oppression, or am I working myself out of a job?
Right.
And so honestly, like, I don't want to be doing this work in 10 years. Like, I don't want there to be like a gap that I have to fill. You know, that's the goal. That's the end goal. And I think a lot of nonprofits have to ask themselves that too. Like, why did I initially get into this work? Is it because like I want to benefit off of homelessness, or the fact that there's so many unplanned pregnancies, or because people don't know about their sexual health, you know? Or am I actually trying to solve that problem? Am I trying to be part of the solution? And you know, those are tough conversations, but you have to have them. um, I really think that what's happened in the past, I don't know when it started or how long it's been going on, but yeah, I've definitely witnessed, you know, just a lot of folks like benefiting off of oppression. You know, like lots of charities as well. And so, yeah, let's just have like real conversations with ourselves, and see where we fit in. I think it's also about understanding privileges. And so really understanding like, how many privileges do I hold? And am I taking up space away from someone that should actually be doing this work? So many times, like, you know, I see like so many non-Indigenous teachers teaching Indigenous studies.
Right.
And it's just like, yikes, like, cool, you've been doing that for 10 years and you had to like open the door for that to happen. But maybe now is the time you step back and Indigenous folks actually start teaching their own cultures. And that's just one example, but I see it too, like in nonprofits. Like it'll be like an Indigenous outreach worker and they'll be non-Indigenous, and it's just kind of strange.
Yeah.
So yeah, think like really like thinking about, what am I benefiting from, and when should I step back?
I think the charity model that so many not-for-profits find themselves subscribing to prevents sort of the disruption or even an interrogation of those power imbalances, and having folks do that work, and move towards actual justice work. So shifting from an idea that this is about charity to this is about justice, and what does that shift involve, and what does it require of the people who are in those positions? What are they willing to give up? What are they willing to give to the work? How are they willing to create space in like meaningful and intentional ways, rather than doing the work from a place of power over, right? Which often happens in the not-for-profit sector. I think that's really important.
We have a few minutes left, and there was a great comment here from Marnie. I have to take like a minute to say thanks, Marnie. Like, you've been sharing some really helpful resources in the chat, so very helpful. And yeah, this is also about being like constructive and moving forward in sense of, so we have nonprofit organizations that are non-Indigenous. How can they be more effective in offering support? Do you have any examples of positive cases that speak to that?
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently too. Someone, we were trying to like brainstorm about it, but I have like, I would say maybe one. No, that's not true. Okay, two. I could think of two really great partnerships that we have. So one of them is like the one that I mentioned, that they said they wanted to give the land back to us.
Right.
So like that's like huge. If they actually gave the land back to us, but they gave us their keys, like, and so, you know, it's almost there, and they've never asked us for like, oh, let me see a report on how many times you went to this space that I gave you the key for. Like,
Right.
it's just like, here's the key, I trust you, and like, I'm here to support you. Another great example is there was like a call like during COVID for Indigenous folks to create like online content and like webinars and things like that. But again, it was kind of created from a national perspective. And so it's kind of like, I call it parachuting. And so it happens a lot, like national ideas want to like just parachute their ideas into local communities. And so this organization, even though they had the best intentions, that's what they wanted to do. And so luckily, like I had developed a relationship with them, and I felt comfortable enough to let them know like this isn't gonna work. And so you have to like build a relationship. You literally just have to spend time, have conversations, like have tea together, have food together, and be consistent and like develop that relationship over time. And so I told them, like, you know, this isn't going to work, but here's what I would suggest. And they're like, cool, let's do it like that. And so we've been able to bring on like get some honorariums for youth that we work with, to do some webinars, and you know, it's been a really good relationship. But again, like they also trusted us. They're like, cool, like I know that you work with these young people all the time, and so I feel like good that you know what they want to do. So again, like it's about reciprocity too, because even though we're getting some funds from them to support you, they're getting, like, it makes them look good. And so, and we're not mad about that. Like it's an equal sharing relationship. So yeah, those are like two that I could think of. And so hopefully you could like pull some examples from those stories.
That's great. Do you have resources that you can share for people to research? There's a question looking for books or podcasts or maybe media representation that has a more empowering portrayal of Indigenous people and communities. Any resources like that?
I'll just share like our website, because there's like tons of stuff on our website. Um, yeah, like under resources. So like, for example, all of our tea and chats on Monday nights, they've all been recorded, so folks can watch those.
Right.
We recently just made a YouTube channel.
Wonderful.
So they're all on there. What else? Oh, and then like all of our research is on our website, so like our reports and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, documentary. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. But yeah, like one of my favorite books, it's not really related to youth work or anything, but just to learn more about Métis folks, is Half Breed by Maria Campbell. So that's like one of my favorite books, and it really gives like not so much like a political account of Métis, which is often the narratives. It's like so highly political, but Maria Campbell talks about their lived experience as a Métis woman in the prairies. But yeah, and documentaries, like anything by Alanisa Bomsoin.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you
I
very much.
think, yeah, I think we've come to the end of our time together for today. Thank you so much, Gabby, for sharing space with us and sharing your work and sharing so many resources. And thank you to everyone who joined us today for this conversation. We just want to remind folks that this is an ongoing conversation, and if you would like to join us to share the work that you are doing with young people in your community, issues that may be arising in your work, or how you've had to adapt to the current circumstances, please email us at info@youthrex.com. And we hope that some of you might consider joining us for our next conversation, which is next Thursday at 11 a.m. We're going to be speaking to Richard and Vanessa from the Regent Park School of Music, understanding how a community music program shifts and adapts to having to provide music education online, and how they work to build that sense of community among young people. And just for folks who are interested in maybe continuing to kind of learn with us and share knowledge with us over the summer, Cyril, do you want to talk about the Skill Up Samplers briefly?
Yeah, we have the Skill Up Samplers, which are courses that have been taken from our larger certificates. They're open until the end of August, the 31st. And if you go to youthrex.com, you can sign up for that. We have the cannabis education course, the full certificate is open. And I just want to reiterate that next week, that conversation, we're actually going to be launching something really, really special, in that conversation. So you're going to want to be there. Please let people know. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because I can't let the cat out of the bag.
It's a surprise.
Yeah.
And please do feel free to visit our Knowledge Hub if you're looking for resources. Some of the resources that Gabby talked about, we also try to share through the Knowledge Hub. So the Knowledge Hub is where YouthREX shares resources that we've created in partnership and in collaboration with young people and youth workers. And we also try to amplify the work of other folks across the sector. So, so feel free to check out that space for more resources. And this is where you'll find the recording of this conversation. And again, please participate, join us for future conversations. And yeah, definitely don't miss next week when we make a very special announcement. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Cyril. Thank you, Gabby. I hope you have a lovely rest of the week, and we look forward to continuing the conversation going forward. Thanks, everyone.
You got it. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Bye.